Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Shrink Chats. My name is Monica Burton.
And I'm Annette Reiter, and today we have a wonderful guest, Alice Belosa, who is also a licensed marriage family therapist here in Florida. She's also a trained family law mediator and parent coordinator, and she's also served in hundreds of cases as the mental health facilitator for collaborative divorces, besides a bunch of other credits that we'll put on our page so everybody can get to know you, Alice. Thank you for joining us today as we talk about like co-parenting, parallel parenting, and the pandemic, right?
Yes, it's such an important topic. We are seeing more and more in our offices couples who were either getting along, now aren't. They're disagreeing about decisions around the pandemic, as well as divorced couples who maybe were getting along, now are not getting along. Yes. Regarding co-parenting and decisions of, do we go on vacation or not go on vacation? And, the big issue right now is going back to school. Do we go virtually or do we go online?
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you're seeing this, Alice. I mean, parents, even intact families, are arguing more over these decisions. There's just differences, right? And the natural thing that we know as licensed marriage family therapists is that parents disagree, and that can be a great way, if you can calm down and relax and talk it through, to come to some very great choices about how you parent and what you do. But for parents who don't do that well, or that's part of the reason they're not together anymore, what are some of your tips or guidelines, or what are you seeing? We just want to pick your brain.
Okay, thank you. So I, like you in my private practice, am seeing families that are intact families and divorced families who have historically co-parented pretty well coming back to me, and really they're nervous. There's been a lot of mixed information, a lot of fear. And so they want to talk about their particular family and particular issues with a therapist. And so there's that component. And then there's the component of couples who are divorced or divorcing and how to manage this, which can be more challenging for obvious reasons. Whatever level of stress you had previous to this, it's typically a notch or two up now because of the obvious reasons, right? And And there's really not been a lot of clear direction for folks, and it really comes down to joint parental rights and responsibility, where people are going to need to talk about what the issues are, what information they have. There's some go-to places like the CDC and the American Pediatrics information. Their website's great, that can give some guidance, but ultimately parents have to make decisions for their own families, and a lot of that depends on the particulars of their family, the developmental stages of their kids, and what they can feel comfortable with. The risk factors for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. There's often families that have other risk factors that, were already going on. Maybe a kid who has got a compromised immune system, or maybe a grandparent that lives in the house that has a compromised immune system. These are things that have probably turned up the fire on the pan a little bit, right?
Yeah. And I've also had some wonderful people who work in the health field. I'm thinking about a client who is an ER doc at Tampa General, and she's magnificent. She's just a wonderful, brave, lovely, dedicated professional. And, she's a single mom, and she had the tough choice of making a decision to send her 7-year-old little son up to Maine to be with dad. 4 months. This is the first time she's been the primary residence for this child. It was a really difficult decision for her, and I've seen the toll that's taken on her. She's on the stress of being a doctor, and especially an ER doc, right? And then not having her son, and it's gone on for months and months, far more than anybody would have thought. So it's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we talk a lot about breathing, right, Monica?
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost every episode, take a pause and breathe to kind of start thinking it through.
Right. Yeah. I think, too, the other thing that we're seeing and that we've talked about in other podcasts is, do we make a decision off of fear, or do we make an informed decision?
Yeah.
And, when we're a family where divorce isn't an option, we have to go through that process. And I think even when there's divorce, or if you're a single parent, you still have to, like, we can jump into the fear, which is really easy to do, or we can pause and make that more informed decision. And I think, I refer to the CDC website all the time because it seems like that's the best place to go as opposed to Facebook, which some of our families maybe want to go to Facebook instead of, the CDC website. But I think it's kind of, so first, like, pause and breathe, like we've said, identify your fear, and just say, okay, that's there and that's real and that's okay. And now what? And I don't know, I guess one of the questions that as therapists we kind of go through is like, what is not that we can give legal advice, but, when it's a divorced family, it's like, what sort of options do they need to talk about? When do they need to talk to an attorney if they're really disagreeing? When do they call a mediator? Like, and how do they kind of stay in that place instead of just jumping into fear?
So tough questions, but I can tell you that the county that you live in has likely given some guidance in this matter, some administrative orders regarding your particular county. So I live in Hillsborough County, for example. They've given us some legal guidance that is helpful. I'm the dispute resolution person identified in the parenting plan for a few families, and because I've done this a long time, I was aware enough to maybe be a little proactive about this with my cases and call them when this first happened way back in March. Hey, this is coming up. I want you to be aware of it. I want you to understand, that this is going to be really important that the two of you communicate better than ever. And if you need me to help you to have a set weekly call or every other week to talk the issues through, because they're going to be changing. And sure enough, they went crazier than anybody would have thought, right? Longer and all of that. But in retrospect, that was just a lucky call on my part, because those people did far better than the families that I'm hearing from colleagues that didn't get ahead of it because people were then reactive. So that falls into what you're talking about, reacting in fear. Mm-hmm. The guidance really is the idea of keeping isolation, which is quite different for say, a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old than a 16-year-old, than an adult child coming home who's 25, right? Mm-hmm. Then for us as adults and parents, then our parents. I have a mom who's in an assisted living who calls me all the time and says to me, why am I in jail? Why can't my family see me? Why can't I see you? And it's been terrible for her mental health. It has definitely impacted her mental status in a negative way, and everyone there. But she's safe, and every day we have to repeat the reasons for this. So in Hillsborough County, the order has been the following, and I think it's important to understand that we are a shared rights and responsibility state. If you have children together, whether you're married or not, doesn't matter. Whether you were ever married or not, doesn't matter. Whether you're an intact family or you're a divorced family, doesn't matter. It's all the same. It's a shared rights and responsibility state. So that means unless you have a parenting plan, which is a legal document filed with the court that says otherwise, you two have to jointly come to some decisions about some things, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have a parenting plan in place, Hillsborough County has said the following. This is the administrative order for them. It says that under shared parenting, which the vast majority of families are under shared parenting versus sole parenting, right? If in a final judgment or temporary order, or if the order of the court awards parental responsibilities or time sharing, the parties must follow the calendar as published in the order, and neither parent is authorized to make a unilateral modification to the time sharing calendar based on COVID-19. Any time sharing modification will be based only upon the parties' mutual agreement or upon a motion in subsequent or court orders. The parties elect, or if the parties elect specifically to modify time sharing consistent with the provision. So really what it's saying is, look, I've had clients call me and say, my ex-husband's a doctor and he's going up to Moffitt every day. I don't want to send my children over there. Well, you can't just unilaterally say that's it. I'm not going to do that. That's an example.
Right. Mm-hmm. Because you're using COVID as the excuse, and that says you can't use that, right?
And you might have some valid reasons. For example, I have a family that I work with where the husband is a doctor, and the wife was very concerned about their 3-year-old, and they're divorced. And she was giving me a long array of complaints that she didn't feel he was following the CDC recommendations, that he wasn't socially isolating, that he wasn't taking this seriously, even though he's a doctor. So I asked him to come to my office, and in he rolls in my office, and guess what? He has on his scrubs.
Oh my gosh.
And he walks right into my office, which I stopped him and said, put on your mask. Here's a mask. Go in my bathroom and wash your hands, and then come in here. Right?
Yeah.
And she was right. She had some valid concerns, and we ended up having a big conversation about that.
Right. Yeah. So having someone like Alice working for you, if you are a divorced family, might not be a bad idea. I know I've made a lot of referrals to people like Alice and to you during this time to help them talk it through, kind of having that middle third party that's just going to try to kind of hold the center and not going to be reactive to the fear, and also doesn't have the side of either one's agenda.
Yes.
If you can, or you or somebody like you can play that role. But I mean, these guidelines are very important to understand for your county. And I know you're speaking primarily for Hillsborough County here in the state of Florida, but you have some wisdom too. These are normally written similarly in other counties.
True. Yeah, that's right. And I think that the issues at hand, as things progress and we're home longer, and for example, returning to school, this is a topic that a lot of my couples are asking me about. And what I mean by that, my therapy cases, but really more my dispute resolution people who are divorced and they have different ideas and they're anxious about this. And what I have found that has been helpful is for us to sit down and talk about the particulars of their family. I'll give you an example. I have a couple where they have a 3-year-old child in preschool, and they have a 7-year-old child in a private school that is very structured and small. Now, we have, as we've talked it through, I think the conclusion has been reached that those are very different scenarios. You can't probably enforce keeping a mask on a 3-year-old who's going to preschool, right?
It's hard.
Social distancing either, right? They can try, and yet the child that goes to the private school, who is a very compliant little girl, she does great with leaving her mask on, and she is going to stay in her chair and do what she's told to do. And it's a very structured, small classroom. So really, if they choose together, because it's a joint parental decision to return to school, she could probably return in person. She's dying to return to be with her friends, right? But they've been nervous about this. But probably the 3-year-old should probably not return necessarily right away until they can see what happens and how this comes down. That's what I think they've concluded. Yeah.
That's very unfamiliar to what I've been hearing in my office too, from cases, that the private school situations seem to be, because they are smaller, and the private schools got a jump start on it, like you were discussing how that helps. They've been thinking about it a little bit longer, whereas public schools have been waiting for these decisions to come down that are still not made here in Florida, at least. I'm not speaking to other parts of the country.
Yes.
So I think a lot of the public school parents are a little bit more iffy about whether they're going to return. I'm having more and more of my private school parents finally kind of calm down after listening to what their private schools are going to do and say, let's try it, because our kids are going crazy at home. I mean, this isn't healthy for them. I mean, not crazy. Like, I know I'm a mental health therapist, so I shouldn't say that, but they're just stir crazy.
Yeah. Cabin fever, right? Cabin.
Yes.
And we do know that social isolation increases, depression, a feeling of feeling alone and kind of empty. I live in a condo, my husband and I, and our 29-year-old daughter who lives in Manhattan is back living with us because she and her cat, it's been great. She and her cat decided to leave New York back in March when things got crazy there. And she's been here ever since. And I think she's seeing, because she works for legal aid and it's a remote job, she's going to stay here probably for a little bit longer, maybe even through the winter, because she don't like the winter up there. I don't know. We'll see. We're happy to have her. But she brought up something that I think was true. She was telling me that when she was in the elevator in our condo, that she ran into a couple of our neighbors. And a couple of these neighbors are older and live alone. And how they commented to her how lonely they were. these are people who can leave and can come and go. They can walk outside in the Bay Shore, which is where we live in this community, kind of a community area where people walk. They can go to the grocery store, unlike my mother, who's in an assisted living, who's in jail, right?
Right, yeah.
She can't go anywhere. Nobody can go see her. But even these people living alone in their condos here were mentioning to her how lonely. And one of the sweet little ladies said to my daughter, I think she's a lady who's probably, 70, really cute, very healthy, said to my 29-year-old daughter, well, y'all should just come down and have some iced tea with us and with me. We'll kind of and she was all about it because she's lonely too. She's 29 and can't go out and, be with anybody here either. So.
Sure. Well, I think that's a good point to make, and one that we're, like, even as mental health professionals, are seeing what social isolation is really doing. Like, we're not meant to be isolated in this way.
Yes.
It's been, I don't know, a few months ago, the suicide hotline in California, reached its numbers in 2 weeks than what it's been in a whole year. I mean, so we're just seeing, and more clients are, like you said it earlier, if you had a little anxiety, you have a lot of anxiety now.
Right.
And, our older population who is at risk, some of them are listening and they are lonely,
Yeah.
and loneliness can be very detrimental for your physical health too.
Yes.
What some of the research points out, that loneliness is bad for our physical health, just like the coronavirus is. So how do we, I think a lot of this is looking at how we're making decisions with taking a little bit of risk, not like we're going out, no mask, we're going to go sit in a bar that has 1 million people in it, or we're going to avoid that, wear a mask, wash our hands, do things that still let us live our lives and at the same time help us reduce the amount of risk that we're putting ourselves in. And I think parents with children, we're trying to make those decisions too, because we have seen our kids suffer through this. And I think sometimes kids don't get a voice, right? It's like they don't get a voice in it. And so to be able to say, how can we best advocate for our children as well as keep them safe, but live too?
So you're bringing up a point that I think is interesting, which is, you're right. Our children often, if given a choice, do you want to get up and go to school at 8 o'clock in the morning? They might say, no, I'd rather not. And yet they have to, right? We make that decision as a society for them. And of course, here is a pandemic. Parents are going to make the decisions. But imagine this. Now you're from a divorced family and your parents don't see eye to eye on this matter.
Yeah, right? We can imagine this. I'm with you.
Yeah. You're a teenager and you look around and you see your other friends are out and about, right? Doing stuff with their friends, and your awful parents have said no to date, but you can see the weak link in your family. And if you hit one parent up, they're going to be more likely to say yes to you than the other, right? So there you go. So there's something that I might get a call on, or y'all might get a call on that, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we, of course, would probably, all three of us do the same thing. We would try to facilitate communication. We'd try to probably get each of them to hear the other person's concerns. The idea of the calculation of the risk and the benefit, which I think Monica mentioned, kind of, right? Okay, right. There you go. And then if you're divorced and you're not happy with each other and you're still kind of at an impasse here, then you have to look at what the law offers, right? The law pretty much says that parenting time sharing stays in place, and there is on all parenting plans, the Supreme Court says that when you have your child and you have, in the state of Florida anyways, when you have your child and you have timeshare, short of some kind of endangerment for the child, you get to make day-to-day decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, would this be a day-to-day decision, or is this a bigger and broader issue, right? It probably would fall under day-to-day unless you're doing something ridiculous, like sending your child to, the middle of a bar with no mask on and, he's hugging everything or something obvious, right? So here we have a lot of the opportunity for parents to have differences and yet probably not to have a lot of power to do anything about what's happening in the other house, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's an issue because then they get the virus and they bring it home to you too, right? Mm-hmm. You can see how this creates a lot of stress for divorced parents who can't really be on the same page. Or maybe it's not even that. Maybe it's just one parent has a limited capacity to manage children home all day long because he or she is working or doesn't have the personality where they can manage it, right?
Right.
Right. Well, I think too, it's looking at like in your situation where these two parents, well, I don't know how school can be like a day-to-day decision. I think that's in my brain, that's a bigger decision. With divorced parents, as we know, like when the kids are with you, you're making those decisions. And when they're with the other parent, there's a lot of things that you have to let go of, because you don't get a say anymore. And that, that's that feeling to the parent that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my ex is doing this, or this. I mean, again, I'm not talking abuse or danger or things like that, but just, not making the same parenting decisions that you are. It's hard to let go of those things. And now you have the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it's this like the fear that's coming up, as well as like, you're divorced for probably several reasons, and parenting is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, one of the things that I think is helpful is to remind yourself when you're in that really state of feeling helpless or frustrated, it's like you breathe.
A lot.
Breathe a lot. And then just like, to me, I always have to think about what is the best decision for the kids, what's in my control, and letting go, like, okay, they're over there. I don't have a say in that. What am I teaching them when they're with me that I know is going to help them hopefully make good decisions when they're not with me, whether if they're at the other parent's house or they're at school or they're out with their friends, and I think even with this coronavirus, like teaching your kids, like, okay, when you're not with me, when you have older kids, you got to wear your mask. You need to remember to wash your hands. Don't share drinks. So educating them to the best of your ability, so when they're not with you, they're making good choices. But I still think it comes back to this like school decision, when one parent is adamant that they be virtual and one parent is adamant that they're going to school. Like that is the loop that,
So education is something that's typically addressed in their own parenting plan. So it'll either be a joint parental decision or not. And if it's a joint parental decision, then it's a joint parental decision, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking more like play dates would be an example. That would be a day-to-day decision, right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And there are families who might say, and they have said this to me, we know a couple of other families that are sequestering and not being around other people, and there's for more than 2 weeks at a time, and we can have our children play with them. And they're doing that because they feel like they have to have an outlet for their children, and that's their decision, right? But the other parent may not appreciate that, or, I mean, that's not something you can probably do anything about, really.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, I'm going to interrupt, and we're going to take a pause to thank our sponsors for a few seconds here and listen in, and we'll be back with Alex Belosa talking more about parenting and the pandemic and this co-parenting and parallel parenting, whatever parenting you do. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and check us out, and we'll link all of Alice's resources to the podcast too.
Lakeview Health is a leading residential addiction treatment center in Jacksonville, Florida, and a proud sponsor of Shrinks Chat. We are a medically supervised facility specializing in gender-responsive treatment and co-occurring mental health disorders. We empower profound recovery every day. So call us at 813-703-8418 or visit lakeviewhealth.com.
Shrinks Chat is proudly sponsored by St. Petersburg Therapy, providing counseling for individuals, couples, and groups for over 20 years. Now offering the convenience of telemed, online meeting for your health and safety. For more information, visit online at stpetersburgtherapy.com.
Monica Burton is a licensed marriage and family therapist based in St. Petersburg, Florida, with over 17 years of experience. Monica offers individual, family, and couples therapy, and during this time of COVID-19 is offering teletherapy. Monica invites you to check out her YouTube channel, where she offers great tips and advice on relationships, parenting, family health, resolving conflict, and coping with stress. Go to YouTube to find Monica Burton, LMFT. There are new segments every Thursday. Or check out Monica's website at monicaburtonlmft.com.
What if you could train your brain to think healthier thoughts? CoParenting uses daily text messages to help you do exactly that. All you need is a cell phone and a brain. To learn more and try it for yourself, visit www.copenotes.com.
Hello, hello. Welcome back. I'm Annette Reiter.
And I'm Monica Burton. Thanks for listening to this episode of Shrink Chats, where we're talking about making decisions in co-parent families and, the struggle that sometimes we are getting into or that we are hearing our clients get into about, how to best co-parent in the midst of a pandemic, especially when both parents are seeing things a little differently.
Mm-hmm. The other differences we had before the pandemic that I saw a lot of cases, and I'm sure you two did too, were things like the kids stay up too late over at mom's house or dad's house, or they eat the wrong foods, or, mom or dad drink too much beer or wine around them, and, but not too highly risky stuff. And by the way, probably also were the reasons maybe you decided not to live in the same household before, so not new, surprising news, but then add those same problems to now, are they going back to school and we have to make a decision together, and one wants to do this and one wants to do that. They're going over to your girlfriend's or your boyfriend's grandparents' house. What? Why are they doing that? Why is my kid there? That's a highly risky environment, You're going to take them on vacation to, New York City in March when it was the peak of the pandemic. So this is some of the stuff we're all seeing in our offices. And I'm referring to people like Alice and saying, hey, maybe it's time to get a good parent coordinator or somebody to help you guys talk this through more, or just come into a good family therapist and let's start chatting about these differences. What other tips are you seeing with these kind of more extreme decisions that, fear just is riddling our families right now?
Yeah.
It's riddling my families, and we're an intact family.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think the guiding post is going to both morally and legally always be the children's best interests.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the guiding point from my office, and I believe yours as well, and certainly from the court. So what that would mean would be it's going to be very much an individual call. I have a couple that I'm working with now. They decided that their oldest daughter is going to go back to school in person. Mm-hmm. This is somebody who lives in Pinellas County, actually, in Florida. And they're going to go back to school. And this is a child who's very motivated. She's in her 11th grade year, which is the toughest year. She has a lot of AP classes and they just think it'll be too hard for her to try to manage all this from home. But she's an 11th grader, right? And they've laid it out. It's a big school. I guess the school has sent out some information about what they're going to do. But they have 4 other children and that are younger. And that is not the decision they've made for their younger children. Mm-hmm. So I think even though they're divorced and there's been a lot of conflict between them, they have understood that the daughter's feelings about this did matter. She was an older child, and she relayed to them that she was worried she wasn't going to be able to get these college courses done, online. That's a factor. Very individual.
Right. Well, and I think that there's also probably some stage development of maybe families in the divorce process. And it sounds like you're talking about, and particularly in this case, you don't have to disclose it, but they may be a little bit further along in being divorced and have worked through other differences. And obviously a 17, almost 18-year-old is going to have their very strong opinions too. So they're just not going to tell her what she's going to do. She might have an idea of her own. So, which is good parenting. You want to encourage that. So it's a balance, right? But some parents are just, divorces are on a rise. We know the divorce attorneys in Pinellas are very, very busy. And so these are some of the very first time separated people trying to work this through, and the stuff they didn't get along with during their marriage is even more heightened and more experienced during the divorce process. So I think I don't really have the developmental stages of divorce off the top of my head here, but we all know them, that there's different stages of development, and whether you're really at that stage that you want to see your partner still as a good parent, doing their best, trying, Brene Brown says, assume people are doing their best they can.
Yes.
And that stops you from being too judgmental and mean about it, right? But it's just a different stage. And sometimes, people can't really get there. So then we talk more like that parallel parenting.
I think, too, that remember, if you're in the divorce process or newly divorced, or you just don't get along with your ex, one of the things that I think is really helpful to remember is, what you said earlier, Alice, what's in the best interest of your children? And when you want to complain or talk badly about your ex, do it when your kids are not around.
Friends.
And talk to your friends. And just remember, this isn't about you and your ex anymore. This is about your children. And when you're in that struggle, because you are trying to make this huge decision and fear is a factor, I think that's part of the pause is wait a minute, this isn't about us. This is about what's in the best interest for them. And, and that's not always easy when you're feeling attacked by your ex-partner,
True.
So just remembering that. But I am interested to talk more about parallel parenting.
So parallel parenting is something that we talk about in creating a parenting plan where we minimize contact between parents. So, for example, a feature in parallel planning would be to have the exchange of children from school. So I might write a parenting plan where it would be 1 week on, 1 week off, and the exchange from school would be on Fridays at school dismissal. So they don't have to see each other. So it's minimizing contact. Now, there's going to be some things that they have to confer with each other, and we have all kinds of tools to help facilitate that. We have platforms, communication platforms like Our Family Wizard, where we can have them communicate, and it's written and you can't erase it, and we can see if somebody has seen it or not. So that removes a lot of the stress, because I'll hear a lot about, I texted my ex about this thing or that thing, but they didn't respond, and I'm really aggravated, right? So you can actually look on Our Family Wizard or Talking Parents or whatever platform you're going to use on your phone, and you can see if they've read your message or not, right?
Right.
You also have a shared child calendar on there, removing lots of communication and fighting opportunities, because you put the events that are child related on the calendar. That includes the school calendar, that includes the time sharing calendar, includes holidays. This is my holiday, this is your holiday. So I've got blue weekend, pink weekend, blue weekend, pink, and we've got it clear, and the child can look at it too and know where he or she is. One of the problems with families is that and this is intact families as well as divorcing families, is that there can be triangling in communication with the children. And children are smart. They're going to take advantage of that. I know I sure did when I was a teenager. If they can. And in divorce families where you're not already trusting the other person's judgment or unhappy with them, that is a big issue. It's why it's super important to have some format where you say, you listen to your child and you say, okay, I hear all your concerns. Let me talk to mom. Let me talk to dad. And to always say that. And I always talk to parents about you that's your best friend. You can always say, okay, I'm here. Let me get back to you. You don't have to respond right then. And it's super important. The other thing is making sure we don't make children messengers. Well, you go tell your dad.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. You go tell your mom, whatever. It's putting the children in the middle. And even though you might get your way on that particular issue, it creates a pretty dysfunctional communication pattern that does damage your child.
Unless you do this for Mother's Day gifts, Alice. I just want to put that caveat in there, because every once in a while I'd be like, you can tell your dad I want this for Mother's Day. But I try not to triangulate her too much. But I don't know. She'll have to complain to her therapist. She's in her 20s now.
Yeah, that would be therapeutic. That's therapeutic triangling. Probably allowed on that case.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point, like, it's not about you and your ex anymore. You're already divorced. And if you remember, like, what's in the best interest of your children, it's not making them the messenger. And that will impact your relationship with your children in the future. And then the other piece is, that, oh, well, your mom said this, instead of, hey, this is the issue. Mom and dad need to talk about this first before, it's like, remember, like, your kids, like, they know, they're smart. And our job is to be their parent, not to be their best friend.
Yeah,
Like,
and I always
even
tell
in
parents,
divorce. Go ahead.
every kid wants a couple things from their parents. Every kid wants their parent to always tell them to do what is good and right and best. They never want their parents to tell them, oh, go break the law or go do this or be sneaky. They just don't. Even if you're an adult child, you want your parents to be that person, because that's sort of your sexual identity role model. It's all about a lot of other issues. So there's that. The other thing is that you want your parents to, even though you may not like it, you want your parents to be in control, because if they're not at the helm, that means, buddy, the helm's not being managed and you better jump in there, and that creates all kinds of anxiety for kids, right? From little kids to older kids. So even though they may push back, they really do want you to kind of be in charge. Yeah, it's tough. When you're not in sync with your ex, trying to minimize that. Never speaking ill of your ex. I mean, that's tough. Making sure they don't overhear, especially teenagers. They're super sneaky. They look on your phone. They look on your email. They see things. Making sure that doesn't happen. It's not always easy, but those platforms are helpful, because if you use like Talking Parents or Our Family Wizard, then they can't check because there's a code to get in. They can't see.
Right, so that keeps it private. Plus, it also does a great job of putting it all on there so you can see when people see it, so that if they saw it at 5 o'clock and then they text you at 6 and say, I just saw it. Well, no, you saw it at 5 an hour ago. You didn't just see it, right? Like, so it's all it cleans up all the nonsense.
In an ideal world, parents would always communicate well with each other and put their children's best interests first and put their egos aside, right? Needing to be right, needing to win. Or let's say what I call the iceberg effect. This issue's happening, but you've been doing this to me for years. We've had 15 years of, triggers for them. Putting all that aside, in an ideal world, parents would communicate and get to some resolution about issues. But the reality is we're all pretty imperfect, and we get in the way. Our stuff gets in the way. History gets in the way. And so if we can acknowledge that, and we can say, I need a minute to process this, because you can also say to your child, we're going to talk about it. I'll get back to you. You can also then say that to your co-parent. Let me think this through. You don't have to react and push back. Let me think it through. You can use resources like your pediatrician, for example. Good resource. Hey, call the pediatrician and ask, does our child who have asthma, should we send them back to school? That'd be a good resource. Let's do it jointly. Let's do a joint call so you don't think I'm polluting the well. Let's do that. Right? That would be an example. There are really very few wrongs. By the way, I feel like unless there is some reason to, if one of you is uncomfortable, how about being respectful about that? I mean, and I talk about that in my sessions when I do dispute resolution. If one parent's really worried and afraid about sending the kids back to school, for example, let's give a nod to that. Let's be respectful. That's not crazy or irrational. A lot of people are worried about this, and we don't really understand this virus yet. Right. So, I mean, it's okay to feel that and to validate that. That doesn't mean we have to make our decision based on that. Let's get there. And by the way, can we say we're going to try something for a little while, and if it doesn't work, we're going to pull back? I mean, it doesn't have to be all one way or the other, right? We're either going back or we're not for a semester.
Right. Yeah. When you were talking about triangulation, Alice, it just reminded me how frequently, you've got over 30 years experience. I've got 22 years here in this county. But how frequently I've seen, because when you've done this for a while, you hear later on that this is how it plays out. When you are busy triangulating your child and bringing them into adult conversations you shouldn't be bringing them into, and you're the only parent doing that, for the parent who's not doing it, it feels like, oh, they're winning, they get all the, but eventually it backfires, and it backfires big time. I have lots of 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds who just don't want to talk to that parent. That was the triangulator that was always trying to put them in the middle, that was always trying to paint their mom or dad as the bad person, that was always trying to make them more their friend. There is a point that there's a payback for that, and I've regularly seen that not pay off for the long run. And I do think parenting, professionally, I believe parenting is a long game. You're trying to raise great people down the road, and that's your goal. And if they don't want to talk to you or be with you because you kind of were such a jerk and self-absorbed all the way through their life, that's hard. And it regularly happens.
Oh, I agree. In fact, I struggle to remember a case where that hasn't happened. I think about an extreme case in Pinellas County that I had like 30 years ago. I was a new little fresh therapist and had an office down there by the Vinoy. And I remember this woman who, back in the day, Pinellas County, men rarely got primary time sharing with their kids, right? And this fella got primary, and this poor little wife was just beside herself with shame, and there were lots of accusations. And this woman would come to see me, and we talked it through, and I would just tell her, keep doing your Wednesday visits, keep doing what is right. The little boy would run when he saw him because of all the parental alienation that was happening. Year after year, I would say, keep bringing your Christmas presents for even the little boy. Just keep seeing the little girl, because she would go with her. Keep bringing the gifts to the little boy. He would throw the gifts at her. He would run. He was terrified. I want you to know that when the little boy turned 18, not so little, guess what happened?
Yeah.
He came back. He knocked on her door one day. She didn't even know he knew where she lived because she was in an apartment. And then all the truth of it came out, which was the devastating parental alienation, which is really, it's child abuse that he suffered. And he came back to her, and they were up all night crying and talking and catching up. And ultimately that young man didn't have a relationship with the dad because of all the bad stuff that had happened. So I think you're right. And that was probably the most severe case I've ever seen. But even less severe cases, that's what happens. It comes back on you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's hard to, when you're in it, it's hard to as a parent, because you brought an extreme case, but that's a perfect example. It's very hard to keep doing the right thing when it feels like the other parent is getting all the positive kudos and stuff like that. But ultimately, as much as in the minute that seems like your goal as the parent, your goal is really this bigger vision of a person that's healthy and well-balanced that you'd be honored to know as an adult.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
We are constantly setting an example for our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to keep that in mind, because it's like, what example are we setting?
And it's never too late if you haven't done a good job, if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, oh my God, that's been me. I've been talking bad about the ex. And it's really never too late for a remedy in that. And that means going forward today, don't do it anymore. And you know what you might do? You might talk to your child, and you might say, you know what? I'm thinking about some things that I've said about your dad, and I want you to know I'm really sorry. And that was really not right of me to say that. This is your dad. You ought to love him. He loves you. This is separate from me and him. And would you please forgive me? I mean, you can do that. You can make amends and start over. And that is such a valuable tool to your child about how he or she can do that going forward.
Absolutely. Glennon Doyle always says, finish strong. You might mess up in the day, but finish strong. Repair can happen even if it's 8 hours or 2 days later. And that's another example, is that when you've made a mistake, hold yourself accountable. And that's a great life lesson to show your kids too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think parenting is one of those things that we do without actually doing it. Like, whatever, we may have rules about how many vegetables we're going to eat, or how many cookies we can have, or how much exercise we're going to do, or what time we're going to go to bed. But really, how you live your life, the way you live your life, the choices you make, the way you recover from mistakes, the compassion and the cooperation that's how you're teaching your children to be decent people. And if you're doing it and you just keep trying to do it better tomorrow and keep trying to do it better the next day, then that's really the best example you can do. And I think that's important. And I often talk with teenagers that I see and work with and young adults about the process of making amends. Sometimes it just helps to just do a good deed and then say, I did this, like cook dinner for your parents and say, I did this because I came late on curfew the other night. And I know I know I'm going to be, I know I can't go out next weekend, but that's okay. I've still made dinner for you, right? Like I took out the trash. I did a little extra cleanup because I just needed to make amends to the family. And that's really starting to become an adult human being that manages choices you make.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you've talked about this on your show, but that is a very different thing. If you have two parents, if you're a kid and you have two parents that are divorced who are very different and maybe do not get along well, how can you compartmentalize your life and have relationships with these two people that don't get along well with each other? How can you still love each of them? How can you adapt and transition when you go back and forth to each home? And I think that the burden on the child is something that we need to remember as adults, that we can do something about it. There's this idea of legal remedy to problems when parents are not doing good jobs. It's really there is an ethical obligation to create some legal remedy to encourage that parent to better themselves, because we recognize that the children need their parents, even imperfect parents, even parents who've failed in the past. What can we do to support them so that we can go forward and they can have that relationship? So if you're a parent whose child maybe has been grossly disappointed by your ex, left waiting and they didn't come, right? A lot. Right. Or other things, right? Really presenting the idea to your child, or, what you feel and what you need matters, and that is not okay, but you can still love that person. And you can set a boundary and say, that's not something that is good, but I still love that person, right? And I can still have some sense of a parental bond with that person, love that person, but still set boundaries, which is probably a topic for a whole nother.
Yeah. Right. Well, we're all broken, right? I mean, how many times I'm sure we've all said that to kids. Listen, somebody's being parented by a broken parent. But that doesn't mean they don't love you and they don't care about you, but they may not be able to do it in the best way possible. Yeah. And how can you find a way to accept the love that they can give you the way they can give it to you, or accept the love they gave to you, right? Like 30-year-olds who are struggling with coming to terms with the kind of parents. But yeah, we're kind of getting off topic, but it's good stuff. And it resonates with all of it, Alice. It's been a sheer delight to have you here today.
Thank you.
Any closing stuff?
Yeah, so I'd like to share, I heard a story once that rang so true to me, and I think it's especially true when you're trying to parent children and you're divorced and you see things differently. The idea being that we have maybe a bucket, and it's a pretty big bucket, and we're hoping that the other parent will fill that bucket to the top like you're trying to do, right? But what happens if the other parent doesn't have a bucket? They only have a pint. And they're doing their best. They really are. They're giving all they have, and they're trying to come over with their little pint, and they're pouring it in the bucket for the bucket is the child, of course, right? And they're pouring it in there, and they're doing their best, and you're pissed off, really not happy with them, that they're not doing better, but when, in reality, maybe they're doing their best. Remembering that is helpful.
I like that. That fits with the Brene Brown quote that we were just talking about.
Yes, that's great. That's a great story.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening in, and thanks to Alice for joining our show today.
Thank you for having me.
And don't forget to go to our Facebook page, Instagram, subscribe to us on YouTube to get our weekly shows.